around the time when the dawn of independence was just over the horizon. It was a time of testing boundaries. Africans would push back against the racist policies of the Rhodesians, and the Rhodesians would push back in a manner that we now commonly associate with the colonial hangover. I drove out to Chimanimani for work. If you've ever been there, you know, the landscape, it's so wonderful. The mountains, the green, it's really something else. Anyway, I drove out to Chimanimani for work, and I decided to take a stop at the country club. Now I'm sure you can imagine that country clubs and their sprawling golf courses were undoubtedly segregated. Only gardeners, maids, caddies made into those places. So I walked in, and of course, all eyes were on me. But I didn't give a damn. I went to the bar, I sat on a stool, and I ordered a ball and juice. And just as my beer came, a short, thick-necked Rhodesian came, took my glass, and he stuck his middle finger into my beer. Excuse me, mate. I'm just making sure it's cold enough for you. And like that, he chuckled and he waddled away to his friends. Was I livid? Of course. But what could I do? I picked up my things and I left. Why die for a beer?
Tawengwa. once on the ground before he went into the air. First day of class, this white girl came. Lynn Saunders. She was one of the trainees. I was sitting with Auntie Loveness and them. There were only 8 blacks when I joined Air Zimbabwe. So anyway, she walked and said, "I am Miss Lynn Saunders. I am the senior instructor here at Air Zimbabwe. Can I have your first names?" Auntie Loveness looked at her and said, why should we give you our first names? You told us you are Miss Lynn Saunders. Well, then I am Miss Loveness Makombe. What shocked her was this was the first time she was in a classroom with qualified women. I was a qualified nurse at the time, and I had just spent some time in England, and Auntie Loveness was just coming from Impilo Hospital. I remember our first flight. There was, of course, first class, business class, economy class. So obviously, as a junior, you started work in economy class. And then they would say to us, "You don't come to first class. You must phone." So unfortunately for them, Auntie Loveness and I were put in economy class together. So what would happen is after food service, the food in first class, which was the best thing ever, the senior would bring it to us. So one day, we waited, and no food came. So what did I do? I walked straight into first class. And the senior there, I remember her name was Rosie Field. She looked at me and said, "What on earth are you doing here?" And I said, "Why on earth are you shouting? You can speak to me nicely." She said, "You know the rules. You're not supposed to come here." And I said, "As long as it's written, Air Zimbabwe outside, I am in Zimbabwe and I go wherever I want. So I have come for my food." And she gave it to me. And just like that, we were the first to change everything there because the racism was still very much so. So from then on, whenever you wanted food, all you had to do was call first class and say, "I'm coming for my food." And they didn't stop us. And that was because of me and Auntie Loveness. But South Africa was still South Africa. I remember one flight, one of the Boers said to me, "I have a whiskey and water and the Picanini Madame wants an orange juice." I stopped. "I beg your pardon? Who is Picanini Madame? Whose Picanini Madame are you talking about?" When I tell you this was a 7-year-old girl. I said to him, "I will not serve you unless you ask me with respect," and I went. And he rang and rang and rang the bell, and I had to tell the white flight attendant, "Can you answer that bell because I'm not serving that man with the child." We used to have so many problems on the South African flight. We had piles and piles of reports, and I'm sure they were all in my name because we wore name badges at the time, and I was notorious. So we had a meeting with management, and that Lynn Saunders woman, she said, "Sir, we must talk to these girls. We're having so many bad reports." And I said, "Well, sir, we fly to Frankfurt. We fly to Athens. We fly to Paris. Fantastic reports. Why are all the bad reports coming from South Africa?" It's because of the situation in South Africa. And from then on, how could he take those reports seriously? So we were in line for tickets at the movie. It was Union Avenue, and somebody pushed me in line, and I was pushed into this white guy. And my gosh, he spit at me. I remember it very, very well. He didn't say, "Why did you?" Nothing. No, he spit at me. I think I was with Mavis. I just had to move back and wipe myself.
It was the end of term, and I was in Form 1. Yes, I think it was in Form 1 at Goromonzi. I couldn't wait to be back at Harare. So I got off the train at First Street with my friends. I wanted to go to the supermarket to buy some custard and jelly. At the time, well, we didn't have deep freezers, but I was so sure that I could get that jelly to set if I left it on the roof overnight. And once that jelly set, I would bake a vanilla sponge cake, slice it up, and make some sweet trifle for my baby sisters. That was always my special treat for them. Anyways, I walked briskly to the supermarket. You see, my father would be there in a matter of minutes, and he did not like it when I kept him waiting. So I walked briskly, imagining the smile on my sister's face as I fed her some sweet trifle. I missed them so much, and I was so excited to see them. Absent-mindedly, I walked right into a white family on the sidewalk, and I was jerked back into reality when a cold, thick saliva slid slowly down my face. The small white boy had spit on me. On me! So I raised my hand and I slapped him. Yes, silly child. Of course, his parents dragged me to the police station, and the policeman said to me, "Don't you know you're not allowed to walk on the pavement, Kaffa? How dare you hit a Pickaninny bass?" What? A Pickaninny what? A Pickaninny bass? What made that 9-year-old brat my boss? I was 13 years old, and I was more civilized than his stupid, spitting self. Clearly, his parents had taught him no manners. So I stared up at the policeman, and he shrunk before my eyes. But it was unfair. Why was I being shouted at for hitting him? Why was no one shouting at him for spitting on me? Resentment swelled in my heart. That boy, he will never be forgiven.
See, my father was a minister of religion, apostolic faith mission. It was a white church, so every time Mr. Wilson came, everyone had to give offering and he would take everything with him. But on the Sundays that my father was preaching, no offering would be taken. My father couldn't touch the church's money. I was in sub A or sub B, which is like kindergarten, and that was my first exposure to racism. I remember I said, "Oh, this white reverend can take money from us, but my father cannot touch the money." My father wasn't paid. He had to have private businesses on the side. He used to order used clothes from the Belgian Congo, now DRC, and sell them. That was my introduction to this unequal treatment. And as you grow up, you go to downtown Salisbury, and as an African, if you want to buy something, you don't just walk into a shop. You have to buy it through the African window. I remember this one time, after my father bought some furniture, he asked them, "But how are you going to bring it out?" Wasn't it I who bought it through the African window? I expect my furniture to come out that window too. He just wanted to make a point. In terms of schooling, blacks had their own education system called African education. There was a department for coloreds, another for Indians, and then there was the European education system. There were courses that weren't taught to Africans. Blacks who wanted to study medicine or law had to go to South Africa and study at apartheid universities just for Africans. Even in town, it's obvious. If you're walking in the stoop and there's a white family coming from there, you risk your life. You have to step into the street so that a white man, woman, or white child can pass. You can get a 6-year-old boy slapping a 65-year-old man, and he won't say anything but, "Thank you, Pickaninny boss," wear his hat and go. But if a black man is walking on the pavement and he accidentally rubs his shoulder against a white woman, he would go to jail. Another ridiculous thing is all the European beers, your whiskeys, brandies, anything distilled or refined wasn't sold to Africans. And if an African was caught with a bottle of brandy, he would go to jail. You were only allowed to buy KB, Kaffir beer. That's the only thing you get legally anyway. Anything else? Jail. Even the shop would be in trouble. Africans used to pay a white man or a colored to go and buy liquor for them. Because coloreds were white men's children, you see.
Black woman to work for Barclays Bank in Salisbury at that time. So I was young and pretty, and you always had to carry yourself with dignity. So just before lunch, we take lunch orders. And I remember this lady, a Mrs. Rogers, saying, "Oh, why didn't you ask the boy to get your lunch?" And this boy who got the lunch orders was a big black African man. He walked towards a desk and banged his fist on the desk and said, "I am not your boy." It was always the white women. They were absolutely clueless. I remember taking the bus from Highfields through Eastleigh, and we'd see the white people playing in their swimming pools, whilst we weren't even allowed to walk on the same streets. It used to bother me so much. And the older generation would say, "No, Kwamuno, why are you fighting?" You see, they were content with having their little houses in the townships, but we wanted more. And this is why you would just cross to Mozambique without telling your family. You just would not come back from school and go and join the war. My cousin Dagi, he was a guerrilla to the core. He was a huge man. Well, he's dead now. But I used to ask him about the war. And he told me that they had war names so that they would not be able to go after your family. They put you in a region that was not your rural area, so that if you had to do things to people that were not your relatives, you would not hesitate.
You know, before that, when I attended the black schools, I didn't feel the racism. I didn't feel the second-class citizenship, because you were always surrounded by blacks. You didn't even interact with the Europeans or the coloreds. In fact, the Europeans, coloreds, Asians, Africans, we all had separate education departments, separate curricula. Separate except for the fact that, of course, they were all Eurocentric. Can you believe I was an African, attending African institutions? I never learned any African history. They didn't teach us science and math either. The theory behind that, of course, was, well, you know, these Africans, they live in rural villages, in round huts, and therefore, the conceptualization of rectangles and angles would be so foreign to them that we cannot teach them science and math.
The education from primary to secondary was simply so that blacks could serve white professionals as clerks. There were separate lines for the course cues, separate everything. I look back and I don't even understand how we shared the same bathrooms. But there were no more than maybe 20 Africans in the university at one time, but we had an African Students Union, and we would stay up all night talking about Prime Minister Ian Smith's unilateral Declaration of Independence. It was during my days at the university that I realized that I'm black in Africa and I'm losing out in my own country, for Christ's sake. And I remember this day. Ian Smith was at the front. He was capping the white graduates. Us Africans were in the back, but we started to sing, Ishe Komborera Africa. God bless Africa. That was the African national anthem at the time, and it was banned in the country. Ian Smith stopped the capping ceremony. He looks over to us and he says, Bobo Johnny! Baboon. Climb the tree. He said, you are uncouth, uncivilized, leave. He knew he was unwanted there.
You mean the first time I realized I was going to Royal Cinema in town where Edgar's is now on First Street. I was going to watch him move. No, it was a musical called Woodstock. And I'm out there sitting, and there are these two white guys behind me, and they're putting their feet up on my shoulders, and one of them is stepping on me. And one of them had just finished smoking his cigarette, and he put it out on my neck. And you complain, and no one says anything. The manager also was white, so I did nothing. You realize that this is what we're living with and you just put up with it. It's like being called a cafe or being paid different salaries. If the toilet was messy at work, they immediately thought it was you. You just put up with it. When you had visitors from the rural areas, you had to go to the police station and register. Your visitors, your relatives, they wanted to know how long the visitor was there, 5 days, 7 days, and then they would come and make sure the visitor was really there. But those guys, they would come in the middle of the night and shine torches in your eyes. They simply wanted to instill terror. You see, there were a lot of police informers and there was a lot of harassment. It was like, Big Brother is watching. There was also a lot of infighting in Zapu and ZANU. I remember the Zapu youths were trying to harass the ZANU. And the fighting happened right there, on those streets. You would just run. They would take so many young boys and girls to these Mabilo meetings in the middle of the night. And many of those young girls, they would come back pregnant, so we hear. They would tell us, don't go to school, don't wear shoes. But the worst thing that happened was this guy. He rushed in here and they followed him. I remember mother was outside and he was bleeding and he rushed in here and they followed him. There were dishes in the sink and he was washing the blood off his face. And those guys, they came and they said, Mother, we don't care about you or your children. We just want this guy. Yeah, I think they killed that guy. It was right here in this house. I remember very well. Auntie Eunice had to clean it up. And then, I don't know what happened, but I think Smith declared a state of emergency and we woke up surrounded by barbed wire. It was like a concentration camp. They would arbitrarily arrest people. My father, he was marched to the police station so many times. And then by those flats over there, where we lived, there were soldiers right there. We used to go and play soccer with those guys. But then, this one time there was this boy walking by. They told him to stop and he didn't. So they shot him right there. And then this other time, this guy, this ex-combatant came to visit my mother in the middle of the night. The Rhodesian soldiers found out. They was shooting throughout the entire night until they killed him and his whole family. Pa, 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 pa. In the rural areas, they used to put people in keeps, like a doghouse. There was also a curfew from 6 to 6, and if you were late, Okoyo, you'd be shot on the spot. And then there were these mercenaries whom they hired. These guys used to ride around on horses. I remember my mother said, people in the rural areas are in for a hard time. I've never seen white people like that. They would go to sleep at 5 and lock up because of these headhunters who were looking for tails. That's why back then so many young black men ended up just fleeing into towns or crossing into Mozambique. It was bad, but then that was just my experience. There were also the roadblocks, the harassment, the searching of cars. Sometimes even without wanting, you'd find whole schools marched to Mozambique for training. Can you imagine? The whole school gone.
You know, it was my first, I was in Form 1 at Goromonzi. I was in my cookery class with Miss Prosser, and she sent a few of us on an errand. You know, Goromonzi was the best, and it was the only high school for black children. Only a handful of us made it to high school then, but that was the law. Anyway, in cookery class, Miss Prosser sent a few of us to her flat. She told us, I want you to go to my flat and get me the newspapers from under the electric stove. But she stopped herself and looked tut-tutting as if to say, how could I be so forgetful? Dear me, you Africans have no idea what an electric stove is. You know, white people thought we only had wooden coal stoves. Anyway, I told her, Miss Prosser, My family has a 4-piece electric stove at home. She looked at me and she turned bright red. Her neck thickened as if she had mumps. She called me a liar and told me that I should tell the truth. When I insisted, I also told her that my father drove a car, and a car with a radio at that. She slapped me and said that I should tell the truth. I was sent to detention. These white women really had no idea how black people live.
Thanks, Dad. It became quite the hobby. I would snap all around the location. People would ask me to take pictures of weddings, funerals, baptisms, or just everyday poses of lovers by the Musasa tree. I would charge a penny for a photo, and I had a small shop by Machi Pisa, and I had a darkroom in the back where I developed the photos. I was asleep late one night, and there was a knock at my door. Around the time, everyone at the location was wary about nighttime visitors because the war was really picking up. I lay still in my bed. The knock again in a soft voice. "We come in peace. We wish only to speak with you." I opened my door and there were 2 gorillas standing on my stoop. I let them into my sitting room and we spoke in complete darkness. At that time, there were many sellouts working under cover for the Rhodesians, and I could get caught if I switched on the lights. So under the cover of darkness, the boys told me what they wanted. They wanted me to supply them with cameras so they could go to training camps and take pictures of the conditions there, then bring the photos back to me to develop and mail overseas. It was an interesting demand. I was terrified, but I had no choice. I was committed to the cause. I gave the boys 3 cameras and film, and I didn't hear back from them. 2 weeks later, there was a similar knock at my window. I pulled back my curtain, and there on my windowsill was a small bag, and in the bag was film. I had kept the reels of film for a day. I couldn't develop during the day because I had assistants in my shop, and I didn't want them to see what I was doing. So I would work at night. I would sleep at the shop, then I would walk back with the early morning marking crowd, shower at home, then walk back again to the shop. My wife had cut a corner of our sitting room carpet, and I would hide the photos under there once they were developed. One day, as I was walking back to the shop, I heard a voice, and it was this guy. I don't even know. He was like, "Vakanyama." I turned around, and this man, I'd never seen this guy before. He pulled me into a warm embrace and slipped this envelope into my back pocket. I turned around, and the man smiled heartily and just walked away. I was terrified, so I ran back to my shop, and I locked myself in the toilet. I took out the package from my pocket, and it was a letter. A letter from the major political prisoners at Tawengwa prison asking me to come photograph their living conditions in the wild. Again, I was terrified, but I had no choice. I assembled a team of my most trusted friends, and we drove 9 hours to Tawengwa. The prison was heavily guarded, but there were very few buildings, just flimsy prisoner tents here and there. As we were driving our truck by, the prisoners walked out. And once we got a good view of the prisoners, we stopped the car. By the time we had stopped the car, unfortunately, the Rhodesians were near again. So I went under the truck, grabbed out my camera. In rapid succession, I took as many pictures as I could. Then I stuffed the camera in my underwear. Don't worry, I had oversized overalls on. By the time I got up from under the car, there was a Rhodesian soldier right in front of me with the rifle aimed at my face. He said, "Hey, Kaffir, this is a no-stopping zone." I didn't know what to do, but I turned, and fortunately, one of my friends, he had opened the hood of the car. He was pouring water over the engine. He smiled at the soldier and said, "Hey, sorry, boss, the engine overheated." And just like that, we left. We went back to Highfields, and I developed the photos in the still of night. 2 weeks later, the knock again. The exchange was wordless. I simply went back to the corner of my carpet and pulled the manila with the photographs from underneath and handed it to the man. I didn't know when I'd hear back from them. It was about a month or two later, I was walking back to my shop, and I saw the newspaper headline: "Political prisoners at Gona Kizinga prison living in atrocious conditions with wild animals." I looked at the paper, and there, right before me, were the freedom fighters looking right into my lens.
Everyone is crazy about Friday. Yes, it's the end of the week. But I find that to look forward to Friday is so boring and so predictable. I myself, I like Tuesday. I find Tuesday to be like a woman of extraordinary yet muted beauty. You may not notice at first, but at second glance, you tilt your head a little bit. You notice the beauty of her hair and the immutable strength in her eyes. You notice the strength in her gait. Tuesday. She says, "Move." She insists. She says, "Put one foot in front of the other." And soon you will find your love of Friday. It was on a Tuesday that my life changed, you know. It was on a Tuesday that I joined the war. It was on a Tuesday that I held my first gun. It was on a Tuesday that I looked at a living man and walked away from his cold body. It was on a Tuesday that I dived headfirst into a pit latrine, sloshing about in feces, and swallowed a mouthful of maggots in order to dodge the incessant rain of Rhodesian bombs. That was on a Tuesday. What's that saying again? That insanity is doing the same thing over and over again, but expecting different results? It's not insanity. It's hope. Hope. The unfortunate plague of mankind. It's hope that made me join the war. It's hope that made me leave my family. It's hope that made me dive headfirst into a pit latrine and swallow mouthfuls of maggots. It's hope that made me look at a man and walk away from his cold body. Tuesday. Keep going, and soon you will find your love of Friday. Keep fighting, and soon you will bathe like royalty in a well of shit. She's really beautiful, you know? Tuesday. pity because I did not want to be alone at the farm. I had a girl called Judy. This one time, we had made chicken because the boys liked chicken. And we heard the soldiers were coming. You see, we had a young child hiding in the bushes. And if he saw a truck coming, he would run along a hidden path and tell us that a truck was coming. We took the food, the pots, everything, and threw it in the pit latrine, all of it. The white soldiers would come into my kitchen and put their feet on my kitchen table. My Tawengwa, have you been feeding tares here? No! I saw no one. How very dangerous it was for everyone. You never knew. The guerrillas could accuse you of being a sellout and kill you. An informant could tell the Rhodesians that you were a sellout and they would kill you. No one was safe.
Of 1958 in a clinic in Bare. Well, then it was known as Harare Township. I don't really remember Bare because soon after that, we moved to Highfield. I remember dusty streets, dirty dresses, filthy feet at bedtime. I remember 1960. Whispers of revolt were flying from ear to ear. One night, I woke up choking on smoke. My uncle Elias had to carry me to safety. But our house was badly burned from the petrol bomb. I still dream of that fire. I went to primary school, right behind the house. All I had to do to get in was touch my right ear with my left hand. Just like that. Simple, right? But I hated school back then. I missed the carefree life of running in the streets, kicking up clouds of dirt. Grade 1 was too stressful. I transferred in grade 2. By then, the shouts of revolt had simmered down, and the shouts of political uprising were as clear as the early morning cry of the rooster that brings me to attention! The big boys used to bully us in school. They would come and throw stones at the doors and the windows. You'd be sitting in class one day, and the next moment, you see yourself running home. One day I was running, and this old man beckoned me to come run with him. I was only 10. I looked at him and kept running faster. I knew he was a molester. So we left and went to Kumusha because there was too much political unrest at the time. I was quite the little lady because I was coming from town, you know? We were civilized. The countryside was idyllic. The oranges were sweeter than any other oranges I had ever tasted, and boy, did I like sweets. The air was fresher than city air. But I missed my friends. There was this bully, Gary Murape. One day he was chasing me and I almost got run over by Dominique Mandija's car. I wish he would bully me now. I don't really remember when I knew it for myself. You hear your parents talking about it, you see your grandparents whispering about it, but because you've known nothing, you just
don't know. It was 1976. I was at Wimpy ordering chips from the blacks only window, when this Rhodesian trooper came up to me and said, "Get out, my enemies!" That's when I knew. So I suppressed my feelings and didn't respond. We had to register guests in our own homes. If we didn't, we were taken to the police station. There was no dignity. They treated us like we were nothing. That's when I knew I had to go and fight. One day, before the dawn, I woke up with my best friend Anna. We packed little food and some supplies, and we simply walked.
It was June 6, 1978. I had just come back from sports with the kids and was just returning to my little two-bedroom teacher's cottage to start marking their homework. I remember the door opened just a crack. I turned around and I was looking straight into the butt of an AK rifle. It was a black man, and immediately I knew they were here to make us cross into Mozambique. You see, they couldn't recruit in towns because there were too many Rhodesian soldiers looking out. So they would come to boarding schools by the border, and they would force march the entire school to Mozambique for training. You would find schools deserted. There would be no students, no teachers. Tashrika, Kulungile, are you alone? Yes. Okay, just come with us. We won't shoot. All the African and white missionary teachers were lined up in the courtyard. You see, Asha was Salvation Army School for girls, and so most of the teachers were women. I think the deputy headmistress saw me leaving the cottage with with those two boys, and she made the mistake of calling the headmistress on the telephone. I'm sure of it. One of those boys, he heard her calling. He must have heard her calling. He went in and he shot her. You see, their goal was to instill maximum terror. They then marched the teachers toward the classrooms, and then they marched us all towards the school area. The girls were running all over the place. They were panicking. The boys lined us up, and then they lined up themselves. It was two African men, John Nube and myself, two African women teachers, and then three white women teachers, excluding the deputy headmistress who was already dead. They lined us up, and then we all headed at the same time. It was a truck, and those boys, they thought it was the police. The principal at that moment was walking toward us, and I suspect she may have called the Rhodesian armed rifles. The boys paused. They looked at each other, and then they shot the white women at the same time. All three of them, pa, pa, pa! I saw Lieutenant Thompson's head flying. She was 20 years old, from Ireland. I saw Major Paulson die too. When my wits returned about me, the boys had gone, they disintegrated into the darkness, and I ran. John Nure followed, but John had polio, so we hid behind a gum tree, and then we ran through the forest for the whole night. I ran and I ran and I ran. When I finally stopped to look at my hands, I realized that they'd been torn and ripped from the thorns and barbed wire. We then decided to go back to the school. We walked, and after a few hours, we arrived back at the courtyard. And there was just a silence that I'll never be able to shake. After that, they evacuated the school and we all went back to Bulawayo. I was traumatized. All of these things, these were terrible things that were happening, but I was sympathetic to the cause. Like this incident made me more supportive. All of this was happening because one man, Ian Smith, was being big-headed. Not in 1,000 years, he said. Not in my lifetime, but we insisted. No independence before black majority rule.
Why do you want to know what we did in the war? It's none of your business. See, your generation, you're getting too smart now asking all these questions. Anyway, I'll tell you. So this is what we did. I myself, I was one of a few African businesswomen. I had my own store and I drove a car, which was pretty remarkable for the 60s, if you know what I mean. So anyway, me and my husband, we used to supply the boys with food and with clothes. So what I would do is, I would get the order of jeans and I would go to my car. I would take out the stuffing in the seat and I would layer the jeans, one on top of the other. Then I would take Rexina and cover the chairs again. You know, there were roadblocks on every major highway, and we would have been killed if the Rhodesians found this out. We would get to the roadblock, get out of the car and stand, praying that they wouldn't find those jeans, and we would drive off. Thank God they never saw them. Anyway, now that I think back on the war, I realized that the Rhodesians' major mistake is that they underestimated us. They said, oh no, not my nanny, not my gardener, not my cook. Never will they have the wits about them to start a revolution. But we did. But I must give it to them. They did have one stroke of genius. You see, the question was, how on earth are these boys being fed in the woods? And they said, it must be those Africans with supermarkets. It must be those African businesswomen. So one day I woke up and my supermarket was surrounded with Rhodesian soldiers. I said, okay, no problem. So I said, girls, come, let's knit. So we sat outside my store and we knit. We made little baby boots, little baby bonnets, little baby bibs, we just knit. And then I said, okay girls, you must go home and you must find a doll, a pillow, or a cushion, and you must come with babies on your back. Moya makabereka tohana. And so the girls came, babies on their backs. Hi mama, we've come for our groceries. I said, come in, no problem. And they came in. Then I took out these cushions. And right there, I put some maize meal, I put some vegetables, and I put a chicken. Yes, I did. I put this chicken. And on that chicken, I put little baby boots. I put a little baby bib and a little baby hat. And the girls walked out with groceries on their back for the boys. And they went and they cooked for them. You know, we almost went bankrupt during the war. But we were committed to the cause. You know, there was also a bottle store next to my supermarket. And people would come and they would have drinks and just have a good time. And I remember one day, there were all these guys sitting at this bottle store. And just trucks and trucks of Rhodesian soldiers started coming. You see, major gatherings of African men weren't allowed because they thought it would be a political rally. So the boys were sitting there and the trucks started coming and the boys started running. They said, why don't you just sit? But no, they ran and the soldiers started firing. Oh my goodness. I hid behind my till and I said, today I am dead. When the gunfire stopped, I looked and there was this 6-year-old boy. I used to send him on errands, you know. And there he was. His intestines spilled out in front of my supermarket. You know, that night I was sleeping. My husband, he was away on business. So I was by myself and there was a knock on the door. I was so terrified. Anyway, I opened the door and it was the boys. They said, Maitawuya. I said, no, come in. And they sat. And they said, do you have a car? I said, yes, I have a car. I said, we need a lift. I said, of course, I'll drive you. So we went outside and we rolled the car outside of the compound because we couldn't start the engine, otherwise people would know. So we pushed the car for about 1 kilometer. Now I remember, I drove the boys for about an hour. And I said, boys, where am I dropping you off? They said, mother, don't worry. We'll drop ourselves off. And just like that, they jumped one by one out of the moving truck. I went back home and I went to sleep. The next morning I woke up, it was chaos in the compound. Apparently the news was that General Walls, the Rhodesian commander. He had been beheaded in his sleep. And funny thing is, his farm was about an hour away. Girls, come! Let's meet.
Thank you.